With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement about the rehabilitation of offenders. This government is committed to an ambitious programme of social reform, even at a time of financial constraints. Major changes have already been delivered in welfare and education to tackle the challenge of endemic welfare dependency and educational underperformance, particularly in deprived areas. In the coalition agreement, the government also promised to introduce a rehabilitation revolution to tackle the unacceptable cycle of reoffending. And today I am publishing a consultation paper entitled Transforming Rehabilitation, a Revolution in the Way We Manage Offenders. We need, Mr. Speaker, a tough but intelligent criminal justice system that both punishes people properly when they break the law and also supports them to get their lives back on track so they don't commit crime again in the future. Despite significant increases in government spending on offender management during the past decade, reoffending remains consistently and unacceptably high. In 2010, nearly half of prisoners were reconvicted within a year of release. This rate is even higher for short-sentence prisoners, the great majority of whom receive currently little or no support. Failing to divert offenders away from crime has a wide impact. The Ministry of Justice alone spent over £4 billion on prisons and offender management in 2011-12. And the wider cost of this failure is considerable. The National Audit Office estimated that the economic cost of reoffending by recent ex-prisoners was as much as £13 billion in 2007-8. I am clear that we cannot continue as before. In difficult economic times, delivering real reform requires a dramatically different approach. We cannot afford not to do this. My proposals seek a new emphasis on life management and mentoring support for offenders to address the problems that lead them to turn to crime time and again. And for the first time, all offenders, including those serving less than 12 months, will be subject to mandatory supervision and tailored rehabilitation on release from prison. These offenders have some of the highest reoffending rates, but currently no statutory provision after the halfway point of their sentence. I want to ensure that persistent offenders do not walk out of the prison gates with £46 in their pockets and little or nothing else. My vision is very simple. When someone leaves prison, I want them to already have a mentor in place. I want them to be met at the prison gate, to have a place to live sorted out, to have a package of support set up, be it training or drug treatment or an employability course. I want them also to have someone they can turn to as a wise friend as they turn their lives around. I intend to open up the market for probation services so that we can combine the expertise that exists within the public sector probation service with the innovation and dynamism of private and voluntary providers. These radical forms are underpinned by the principles of the big society, enabling voluntary sector organisations to fully participate in transforming rehabilitation, harnessing their expertise and making the most of existing local links will be vital to delivering the reoffending reductions we need to see. Providers will be commissioned to deliver community orders and licence requirements for the majority of offenders and will be paid by results to reduce reoffending. They will be expected to tackle the causes of reoffending and help offenders turn their lives around. And through the introduction of payment by results, providers from all sectors will have a clear incentive to rehabilitate offenders. We will only pay in full for services that successfully reduce reoffending. Services will be commissioned nationally and delivered across broader geographical areas. I am committed that the new system will continue to make best use of local expertise and to integrate into local existing structures. Potential providers will have to be clear as to how they would sustain local partnerships in contracts, and commissioning will be informed by local intelligence. Extending rehabilitation to more offenders will introduce new costs to the system, and I believe these can be balanced by drawing more providers into the system. Through increased use of competition, we can generate efficiency savings and drive down unit costs across the system, allowing our funding to go further. Now, Mr. Speaker, the public sector probation service does an important job in protecting the public, and the government is very clear about the value and expertise they bring. We want to use and to continue to use that expertise as we transform our approach to rehabilitation. There will be a continuing critical role for the public sector, which will include advising the courts and assessing the risk an offender poses to the public. Offenders who pose the highest risk of serious harm to the public will continue to be managed directly by the public sector, and the public sector will retain ultimate responsibility for public protection. Mr. Speaker, transforming rehabilitation will help to ensure that all of those sentenced to prison or community sentences are properly punished while being supported to turn their backs on crime for good, meaning lower crime, fewer victims and safer communities. I commend this statement to the House.
Mr. Sadiq Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Justice Secretary for advance sight of his statement? There is, Mr. Speaker, universal agreement that we need to do more to reduce reoffending, stopping offenders from going on to commit more crimes and create more innocent victims should be a priority for all of us. Mr. Speaker, our probation service is the Cinderella of our criminal justice system. They have a low public profile, but they are staffed by dedicated professionals who help keep our communities safe. And in 2011, they were awarded the British Quality Foundation Gold Medal for Excellence, and every single probation trust performance was rated by this government as either good or exceptional in 2011. They've done all they've been asked to do by this government. Can I begin by asking the Justice Secretary, when he says he wants to professionalise the probation service, what does he mean? For some time now, Mr. Speaker, the probation service have already been working in partnership with the private sector and voluntary groups. I'm sure the Justice Secretary will have seen, as I have, some of the excellent work taking place in partnership around the country, from Avon and Somerset to Doncaster, from Peterborough to Manchester. There is a place for all in our justice system, bringing in outside experience and innovation, working together in partnership to reduce reoffending. It is also worth looking for new ways to address the serious problems of reoffending, and that was the motivation behind the pilot the last Labour government began in Peterborough, which was a payment by results model. And also, I suspect, why his predecessor launched 2 PBR pilots in probation trusts. It's right to properly test and try out fundamentally new ways of working, because there is no history in criminal justice of payment by results. The Justice Secretary has actually chosen to cancel the 2 PBR pilots in probation set up by his predecessor. Can he explain to the House why? Is it that he has already made up his mind it works, despite there being no evidence at the moment to support this view? However, Mr. Speaker, we do know from where PBR has been used in the provision of other public services, the work programme, it has failed to hit its targets. And he knows, of course, all about this. Out of 800,000 people who started the work programme, only 3.5% were still in work after 6 months. Not a single provider hit the target. In the context of the work programme, that's bad enough. People not getting jobs or failing to keep jobs. In criminal justice, failure could lead to offenders walking the streets without the necessary supervision and support, with the risk that poses to public safety. And we're seeing in the work programme that it's not these small and local charities that are delivering. They've been crowded out by the big multinationals like G4S and A4E. How will he ensure that this isn't repeated in probation? Mr. Speaker, the Justice Secretary is proposing that only low and medium risk offenders will be dealt with by private companies. But can he confirm that medium risk offenders include those who have committed burglary and violent crimes, including domestic violence as well? Mr. Speaker, given that 1 in 4 offenders' risk levels fluctuates during their time on licence, how will he ensure the PBR model will be able to take this into account? And in this regard, how does he propose that the police share their sensitive information with the private sector about offenders under their supervision? Mr. Speaker, the Justice Secretary has also announced an expansion by 25% in the number of offenders that will be subjected to mandatory supervision at a time when his budget is shrinking by 25%. Won't it be the case that resources will have to be stretched ever more thinly to cover this increase in offenders? And can he assure the House that high and medium risk offenders will get the appropriate supervision and support required. Mr Speaker, we are willing to work with the government in order to reduce reoffending. We look very carefully at his consultation document and the answers he gives to the House this afternoon, and hope that the detail provides more reassurances than his statements have so far.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm grateful to the Shadow Justice Secretary for the elements of his statement which were supportive of what we're doing. Of course, I should thank the Labour Party, because it is only thanks to legislation introduced by the Labour government prior to 2010 that enables me to make such an important reform for this country. And indeed, I pay tribute to the former Lord Chancellor who established the Peterborough pilot. And I would say to my honourable friends, to honourable members on all sides of the House, I think the work that is being done in Peterborough Prison by the team involving the St Giles Trust and other charities — I saw St Giles Trust this morning — working in partnership with the private sector, is a very impressive example of what can be done in mentoring offenders. Now, the right honourable gentleman mentions the question of pilots. I have to say, Mr Speaker, the last government was obsessed with pilots. I think in government, sometimes you just have to believe in something and do it, because what they set out was a timetable that would have taken something like 8 years to move from the start of the pilot process to evaluation and something beyond. And sometimes you just have to believe this is the right thing to do. And I can assure you, Mr Speaker, if you went to Peterborough, you'll think it's the right thing to do. Now, the honourable gentleman mentioned the work programme. Now, I wish he'd stop using statistics that are certainly not entirely, how should I describe it? Misleading might be an appropriate language to use, Mr Speaker. But the reality is they keep missing an important point. In the work programme, we don't pay until someone's been in work for more than 6 months. So if 800,000 people joined the work programme in the first year, half of them couldn't have been in work for 6 months. The reality is the work programme has so far helped 200,000 people find jobs. Many of those have been in jobs for the short term and then gone into second jobs. Many of those have gone into long-term employment. It is making a real difference. And I defy any member of this House to visit a work programme centre, see the work is being done and not come away impressed. And well, it's interesting. The honourable gentleman mentions G4S from the sedentary position. It is true that G4S are one of the prime contractors in the work programme. G4S subcontract all of their work in the work programme to voluntary sector organisations and small businesses. And there are the work programme is today, Mr Speaker, the biggest voluntary sector welfare to work programme this country has ever seen, with organisations like the Papworth Trust delivering support right across East Anglia, organisations like Careers Development Group, a charitable organisation that is running large parts of the work programme in London. They need, Mr Speaker, to look at the detail of what is happening. Now, the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, made a sensible point and asked a sensible question about the management of risk and the fluctuation of risk. And what I would say to the House is we intend the Public Probation Service to work closely with local providers, and where there is a variation in risk, where it suddenly becomes clear that an individual represents a clear and present danger of harm to the public, the mechanisms will exist to move those people back under the public sector umbrella. So we will have the public sector continuing to work with the most serious offenders through the MAPA arrangements and similar. The police will continue to work closely with the public sector on the most serious offenders. Where there is a clear and present risk to the public, it is the duty of the Public Probation Service and of this government, and it will continue to be so, to make sure we supervise and manage that risk. Now, and indeed that intelligence is shared between police and the Public Probation Service to manage the risk that exists when it does exist, because we must make sure the public are protected. Now, Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman raised the question about cost. I simply offer him one example of where efficiencies can be delivered. When we in London contracted out the delivery of community sentences, the cost of delivering those sentences fell by nearly 40%. I'm absolutely certain that although there is very good work being done around the probation service, and there will continue to be, and those professionals will continue to work in this field, it is also the case there are efficiencies to be found, efficiencies that can be reinvested in providing support to those under 12-month prisoners who've never had it before. And lastly, Mr Speaker, he raised the question about the more difficult offenders. I want to be absolutely clear, and our consultation document makes it absolutely clear. We will have a pricing mechanism that makes it impossible for providers simply not to support the most difficult prisoners. Every single prisoner has to have support. We are delivering support that is mandated by the courts for every prisoner, and that will be continued.